Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone, I am Heiria Awalia from English Education Department of 5E class at Islamic State University of Sultan Syarif Qasim Riau. And in this video, I would like to present the material about research design in the chapter 11 about research design and planning, and then chapter 12 about sampling. The first of research design and planning. A research design is a plan or strategy that is drawn up for organizing the research and making it practicable, so that research questions can be answered based on evidence and warrants. Some researchers argue that a research design should go into considerable detail on data collection instruments and data types. Others argue that this is a logistical rather than a logical matter, and that a design comprises only or mainly a logical argument in which all the elements of the argument cohere, e.g., issues of research questions, methodologies, or kinds of research suitable to answer the research questions. Next, number one, approaching research planning. What the researcher does depends on what the researcher wants to know and how she or he will go about finding out about the phenomenon in question. The planning of research depends on the kinds of question being asked or investigated. This is not a mechanistic exercise, but depends on the researcher careful consideration of the purpose of the research and the phenomenon being investigated. Next, number two, research design and methodology. Having a rigorous research design is crucial in the research process. In planning research, the researchers commences with the overall purpose of the research and then construct a research design to address this. The research design identifies the evidence needed to address the research purpose, objectives, and question, i.e., the logic that underpins the connection between purpose, objectives, questions, data, and conclusion rounds. Evidence requires an indication of the warrants that will be used to support the case made from the finding of the research. A research design will include items such as: first, the research purpose; second, the research question; third, the problem, issue, phenomenon, matter to be addressed and the focus of the research. 4. The kind of research to be undertaken, methodologies. 5. The timing and duration of the research. 6. The contents of the research, which may lie on a continuum from interventionist to non-interventionist. 7. The people, groups, or subgroups or case involved and how these are decided. 8. How to ensure reliability and validity in the kinds of evidence needed to meet the requirements of the warrants required. 9. Addressing the ethical issue in the research. 10. The organization of the research. Next, number 3, from design to operational planning. If the preceding comments are strategic, then decisions in this field are tactical. They establish the practicalities of the research, assuming that generally it is feasible, i.e., that the orienting decisions have been taken. Decisions here include addressing such questions as: number 1, what are the specific purpose of the research? Number 2, does the research need a research question? 3, how are the general research purpose and I am operationalized into specific research questions? 4. What are the specific research questions? 5. What needs to be focus of the research in order to answer the research questions? 6. What is the main methodology of the research, e.g., a quantitative survey, qualitative research, an ethnographic study, an experiment, a case study, a pitch of action research, etc. 7. Does the research need mixed method? And if so, is the mixed method research a parallel, sequential, combined, or hierarchical approach? 8. Are mixed method research questions formulated where appropriate? 9. How will validity and reliability be addressed? 10. What kinds of data are required? 11. From whom will data be acquired, i.e. sampling? 12. Where else will data be available, e.g. documentary sources? 13. How will the data be gathered, i.e. instrumentation? 14. Who will undertake the research? Number 4. A framework for planning research. Planning research depends on the design of the research, which in turn depends on, first, the kind of question being asked or investigated. Second, the purpose of the research. Third, the research principle informing how one is working, and the philosophies, ontologies, and epistemologies which underpin them. Next, 5. Conducting and reporting a literature review. Before one can progress very far in planning research, it is important to ground the project in validity and reliability. This is achieved in part by a true literature review of the state of the field and how it has been researched to date. A literature review should establish a theoretical framework for the research, indicating the nature and state of the theoretical and empirical fields and important research that has been conducted, and policies that have been issued, defining key terms, constructs, and concepts, and reporting key methodologies used in other research into the topic. A literature review might report contentious areas in the field and why there are contentious contemporary problems that researchers are trying to investigate in the field, difficulties that the field is facing from a research angle, new areas that need to be explored in the field. Next, number 6, searching for literature on the internet. The storage and retrieval of research data on the internet play an important role not only in keeping researchers abreast of development across the world, but also in providing access to data which can inform literature search to establish construct and content validity in their own research. When searching the internet, is useful to keep in mind several points. Number 1, placing words, phrases, or sentences inside inverted commas will keep those words together and in that order in searching for material. This helps to reduce an overload of return sites. Number 2, placing an asterisk after a word or part of a word will return sites that start with that term but which have different endings. For example, teach will return sites on teach, teaching, teacher. Number 3, placing a tilde mark before a word will identify similar word to that which have been entered. For example, English teaching will return sites on English language as well as English teaching. Number 4, placing the word and not or between phrases or word will return website where the command indicated in each one of these words is addressed. 7. How to operationalize research questions. Research questions can ask what, who, why, when, where, and how. The researcher has to turn the general purpose of the research into actual practice, i.e. to operationalize the research, turning a general research aim or purpose into specific, particular concrete research question or hypothesis to which exact specific, concrete answer can be given. It involves specifying a set of operation elements or behavior that can be identified, measured, or manipulated. Next, number 8, distinguishing method from methodologies. In planning research, it is important to clarify the distinction between methodology and method, approaches and instrument, style of research, and ways of collecting data. Simply put, methodology concerns how we find out about the phenomenon, the approach to be used, the principle which underpin it, and the justification for using the kind of research approach adopted. The type of study to be conducted, how the research is undertaken, with its associated issues of kinds of research, sampling, instrumentation, canons of validity, etc. Method concern instrumentation, how data are collected and analyzed, while methodology justifies the method used. Next, 9. Data analysis. The prepared researcher will need to consider how the data will be analyzed. This is important as it has specific bearing on the form of the instrumentation. For example, a researcher will need to plan carefully the layout and structure of a questionnaire survey in order to assess data entry for computer reading and analysis. An inappropriate layout might obstruct data entry and subsequent analysis by computer. The planning of data analysis will need to consider. Number one, what will be done with the data when they have been collected? How will they be processed and analyzed? Number two, how will the result of the analysis be verified, cross-checked, and validated? Number 10, presenting and reporting the result. As with the stage of planning data analysis, the prepared researcher will need to consider the form of the reporting of the research and its result, giving the attention to the needs of a different audience, e.g. an academic audience might require different contents from a wider professional audience, and for a theory from a lay audience. Decision here addressed. Number one, how to write up and report the research. 2. When to write up and report the research, e.g. ongoing or summative. 3. How to present the result in tabular and or written out form. 4. How to present the result is nonverbal form, to whom to report the necessary and possible audience of the research. 5. How frequently to report. Next, 11. A planning metric for research. In planning a piece of research, the range of questions to be addressed can be set into a matrix. At this point, the planner is still at the divergent phase of the research planning, dealing with planning possibilities, opening up the research to all phases and interpretation. In the column headed decision, the research planner is moving toward a convergent phase where planned possibilities become feasible within the term of constraints available to the researcher. Here, the researcher moves down the column marked decision to see how well the decision which is taken in regard to one issue or question fits in with the decision in regard to other issue or question. 12. Managing the planning of research. To manage the complexity in planning outlined above, a simple four-stage model can be proposed. Stage 1. Identify the purpose of the research. Stage 2. Identify and give priority to the constraint under which the research will take place. Stage 3. Plan the possibilities for the research within these constraints. Stage 4. Decide the research design. Next, 13, a work example. Let us say that a school is experiencing low morale and the researcher has been brought in to investigate the school organizational culture as its impact on morale. The researcher has been given open access to the school and has 5 months from the start of the project to producing the report. Next, number 14, ensuring quality in the planning of research. Fitness for a purpose rings in planning research. The research plan must suit the purpose of the research. If the reader is left feeling at the end of this chapter that the task of research is complex, then that is an important message. For rigor and thoughtful truth, planning and necessary if the research is be worthwhile and effective. The intention of the research planning and design is to ensure that rigor, fitness for purpose, and high quality are addressed. Next, Chapter 12 about sampling. The quality of a piece of research stands or falls by the appropriateness of its methodology and instrumentation and by the suitability of the sampling strategy that has been adopted. Question of sampling arise directly out of the issue of defining the population on which the research will focus. Number one, the sample size. A question that novice researchers often ask is just how large their sample for the research should be. This is a deceptively simple question, but there is no clear cut or simple answer. For the sample size depends on a large array of factors. First, the research purpose, questions, and design. Second, the size and nature of the population from which the sample is drawn. Third, heterogeneity of the population from which the sample is drawn. Fourth, the confidence level and confidence interval required. Fifth, the level of accuracy required, the smallest sampling error to be tolerated. Sixth, the statistical power required. 7. Representativeness of the population sought in the sample. 8. The allowances to be made for attrition and non-response. 9. The number of strata in the sample. 10. The variability of the factor under study. 11. The number of variables included in the research. 12. The statistic to be used. 13. The scales being used. 14. The kinds of sample to be used. 15. The nature of research, e.g., quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods. Number 2. Sampling error. Sampling error is often taken to be the difference between the sample mean and the population mean. Sampling error is not necessarily the result of mistakes made in sampling procedures. Rather, a variance may occur due to the chance selection of different individuals. For example, if we take a large number of samples from the population and measure the mean value of each sample, then the sample means will not be identical. Some will be relatively high, some relatively low, and many will cluster around an average or mean value of the samples. Next, number 3, statistical power and sample size. In calculating sample size, a further consideration is the statistical power required for quantitative studies, and statistical power influence affect size. Statistical power is the probability that a study will detect an effect when there really is an effect there to be detected. Separating this from random chance, power is the probability that a test will correctly reject a false null hypothesis and correctly accept the alternative hypothesis when it is true, i.e., finding a true effect. Statistical power analysis has four main parameters. First, the effect size. Second, the sample size, number of observations. Third, the alpha, significance level, usually 0, 0, 5 or lower. Fourth, the power of the statistical test. Statistical power influence sample size to calculate the sample size. Taking account of statistical power, one needs to set the level of the alpha, the beta, and the intended effect size source. Next, number 4, the representativeness of the sample. The researcher will need to consider the extent to which it is important that the sample in fact represents the whole population in question if it is to be a valid sample. To be clear what is being represented, i.e., to set the parameter characteristic of the wider population, the sampling frame clearly and correctly. Number 5, the access to the sample. Access is a key issue and is an early factor that must be decided in research. Researcher will need to ensure not only that access is permitted but is in fact practicable. For example, if a researcher will to conduct research into truancy and unauthorized absent from school, and she decided to interview a sample of truants. The research might never commence as the truants, by definition, would not be present. Number 6, the sampling strategy to be used. The researcher must decide whether to opt for a probability, also known as a random sample, or a non-probability sample, also known as a purposive sample. The difference between them is this: in a probability sample, the chance of member of the wider population being selected for the sample are known, whereas in a non-probability sample, the chance of member of the wider population being selected for the sample are unknown. 7. Probability samples. A probability sample, because it draws randomly from the wider population, is useful if the researcher wishes to be able to make generalization because it seeks representativeness of the wider population. It also permits many statistical tests to be conducted with quantitative data. This is a form of sampling used in randomized control trials. Next, number 8, non-probability samples. The selectivity, which is built into a non-probability sample, derives from the researcher targeting a particular group, in the full knowledge that it does not represent the wider population. It simply represents itself. This is frequently the case in small samples or small-scale research. 9. Sampling in qualitative research. In qualitative research, often non-probability purposive samples are employed. However, while much of the discussion of probability samples is more relevant to quantitative research, though not exclusively so, and while much of the discussion of non-probability samples is more relevant to qualitative research, though not exclusively so, some qualitative research also raises a fundamental question about sampling. 10. Sampling in mixed method research. Even though mixed method may be used, this does not rule out the fact that in some mixed method research, a numerical approach might predominate, with the sampling implication indicated earlier in this chapter, e.g., probability sampling and sample size calculation, whilst in other mixed method approaches qualitative data may predominate, with an emphasis on purposive and non-probability sampling. Next, number 11, planning a sampling strategy. There are several stages in planning the sampling strategy. Stage 1, decide whether you need a sample or whether it is possible to have the whole population. Stage 2, identify the population, its important feature, the sampling frame, and its size. Stage 3, identify the kind of sampling strategy you require, e.g., which variant of probability, non-probability, or mixed method sample you require. Stage 4. Ensure the access the sample in granted, if not be prepared to modify the sampling strategy. Stage 3. Stage 5. For probability sampling, identify the confidence level and confidence intervals that you require. For non-probability sampling, identify the people whom you require in the sample. Stage 6. Calculate the numbers required in the sample, allowing for non-response, incomplete or spoiled responses, attrition and sample mortality, i.e. built-in redundancy, by oversampling. Stage 7. Decide how to gain and manage access and contact, e.g., advertisement, letter, telephone, email, personal visit, personal contacts, or friends. Stage 8. Be prepared to wait. Adjust the data once collected. Okay, next, number 12, conclusion. Decision on sampling must be made with reference to the criterion of fitness for purpose of the research, internally on the purpose of the study and externally on the intentions to generalize or not to generalize, fitness with the research questions, and match with the focus of the research. Which and how many individual, groups, communities, institutions, even places, sites, action, processes, behaviors, etc. to include, and whether to use random sampling, which might or might not provide depth of description and explanation, are complex issues. Sampling decisions might determine the nature, reliability, validity, credibility, trustworthiness, utility, and generalized ability of the data collected and indeed how to collect such data. Okay, I think that's enough for my explanation and thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.